The Rwandan president, Paul Kagame, has been re-elected with a North Korean-style 99% of the popular vote. As always, the tone of media coverage is determined principally by the headlines, and a surprising number of headlines treated this credulously. Rwanda's longtime president, Paul Kagame, wins third presidential term, said Deutsche Welle. Paul Kagame re-elected president with 99% of vote in Rwanda election, The Guardian mildly announced. The Financial Times managed 8 paragraphs of boosterism, including Mr. Kagame, who has ruled the landlocked African nation since the 1994 genocide, was due to have stepped down at this election, having served 2 elected terms. But in 2015, Rwandans petitioned the government to change the constitution to allow him to run again. Mr. Kagame, who inherited a country in ruins after the genocide in which 800,000 mostly ethnic Tutsis and their moderate Hutu supporters were butchered, has been credited with bringing rapid development to the nation of 12 million people. Poverty rates have fallen from 65% to under 40% according to World Bank data. Annual per capita gross national income has risen from $150 to more than $700, and modern infrastructure, from roads to telecom and internet networks, have been built. To be fair, Kagame does have his critics. The Economist, noting that Kagame has both feted and feared, says that those who see Kagame's Rwanda as a model are wrong. The New York Times described the lopsided election as a sign of oppression, reporting on some of the regime's moves against the opposition. However, even this coverage is relatively subdued in tone. More importantly, the criticism is uniformly set against a potted history which references the anti-Tutsi massacres in 1994 and Kagame's economic progress since. These are the 2 pillars of the regime's international credibility, but they omit, crucially, the regime's own crimes up to and including genocide, and the fact that its economic gains are predicated on this violence. The nucleus of the Kagame regime is a military front called the Rwandan Patriotic Front, which, from its base in Uganda, invaded Rwanda in 1990 and took power in 1994. Kagame's organization had attempted to rally the oppressed Tutsi minority, as well as the majority Hutu population, in a struggle to overthrow the Hutu nationalist regime of Juvenal Habyarimana. That strategy failing, it opted for a military invasion. When RPF forces arrived in Rwanda, however, they were not welcomed as liberators. The invasion triggered a protracted war of attrition, which culminated in a genocide perpetrated by the Hutu power faction of Rwandan politics, in which up to 800,000, mostly Tutsis, were killed. The genocide ended when the Rwandan Patriotic Front conquered the country and installed itself as the new government. Almost no newspaper report on Rwanda fails to mention this part of the story, which is so crucial to the regime's international legitimacy. What most accounts neglect is that the RPF itself was already engaged in racist massacres against Hutu civilians during the war. A UN investigation by Robert Gersony in 1994 documented up to 45,000 deaths arising from such massacres at the time, but US pressure ensured that the report was never released. A far larger part of the story that is missing in almost all the thumbnail sketches of Rwanda's past is what happened between then and now. Having taken power, the Rwandan Patriotic Front was determined to project it militarily. In 1996, they invaded North and South Kivu in neighboring Zaire, where millions of Hutu refugees had fled. The RPF claimed it only wanted to prevent the militia members among them from regrouping. So they invaded to help the forces of Laurent Desire Kabila to overthrow the crumbling regime of Mobutu. While the overthrow was achieved with little resistance, Rwandan forces embarked upon a series of massacres. A report by the UN High Commissioner of Human Rights, published in 2010 and covering the period from 1993 to 2003, identified tens of thousands of members of the Hutu ethnic group, all nationalities combined, murdered by Kagame's forces. In the vast majority of cases reported, it was not a question of people killed unintentionally in the course of combat, but people targeted primarily by Rwandan and Allied forces and executed in their hundreds, often with edged weapons. The majority of the victims were children, women, elderly people and the sick who posed no threat to the attacking forces. It went on to argue that these attacks could amount to genocide. Given that the Rwandan regime defined its legitimacy by its having ended the anti-Tutsi genocide, this was explosive material, and these findings were recorded at the time. The New York Times noted that Rwanda could be found guilty of genocide. The Guardian noted that Rwanda had been accused of possible genocide. The regime responded to the report by threatening to sabotage peace efforts which were ongoing at the time. Over 1 million died from direct violence in these wars, and excess deaths from disease and starvation are estimated to range between 2.7 and 5.4 million. But there was a lot more to this than racist genocide, and it might give us some insight into the curious reticence of the press in covering these crimes. The East Africa specialist Gerard Prunier calls Rwanda a very well-managed ethnic, social and economic dictatorship which systematically oppresses the Hutu majority. The invasion of the Congo was a crucial means by which this system was consolidated. It solved the problem of potential opposition coming from the refugee population militarily, including by shelling UN-run refugee camps. Then the RPF systematically took control of the Congo's mining resources and cultivating links to businessmen and multinationals in the process. As a UN panel of experts concluded in 2001, the illegal exploitation of the mineral and forest resources of the country was taking place at an alarming rate, with the effect of producing a massive availability of financial resources for the Rwandan Patriotic Army. Among the minerals exploited were coltan, a crucial material for mobile phone technology without which the global tech boom was impossible. In 2003, a UN report attempted to draw attention to the role of war profiteers in the Congo, including major British and American corporations who were benefiting from a network of relationships with various invading armies, including the RPF. The material, as the Independent reported at the time, was repressed on the grounds that exposing this would derail the peace process. Rwanda didn't have its first presidential election until 2003, which, as the New York Times reported at the time, Kagame won with 94.3% of the vote. By that time, the new Rwandan ruling class had crushed the basis of potential opposition with a genocide and had enriched itself massively in the process. Nor did it cease its activities intended to keep military control over strategic areas, even after a ceasefire was brokered in the Congo in 2003. Instead, as established in a December 2013 report by the UN's group of experts, it opted to create, arm, train and fund the Congolese Revolutionary Army based in North Kivu, known as M23, which carried out rapes and recruited child soldiers in the attempt to take power in the region. It also sent Rwandan soldiers to provide troop reinforcements. As The Guardian reported at the time, the UN accused the United States of trying to suppress the publication of this report, to no avail. This ultimately resulted in President Obama having to wheedle that while he welcomed President Kagame's commitment to moving forward in finding a peaceful solution, Kagame should please stop inciting rapists and murderers. Kagame's major international supporters, as these outrages began, contributing enormously to his global credibility, were Tony Blair and Bill Clinton, and so it would continue. When the UN report accusing Rwanda of war crimes was issued in 2010, Blair was the first to leap to Kagame's defense, describing him, as The Guardian reported at the time, as a visionary leader. Clinton has preserved his close relationship with Kagame through the wealthy donor-funded Clinton Foundation, which, as the New York Times reported in 2015, acts as a non-profit global consulting firm. Clinton ranks Kagame, as Politico reports, as among the greatest leaders of our time. When challenged about Kagame's war crimes in 2013, Clinton evasively justified his stance by reference to economic progress in Rwanda. I suppose I do make more allowances for a government that has produced as much progress as that one has. there are very few situations that are perfect, as though this progress had not been largely achieved on the basis of the same crimes. Confronted with direct evidence of the regime's autocratic nature and its military atrocities, its US and British backers offer obsequious support and sociopathic rationalizations. This puts the international media's strikingly light-touch treatment of Kagame after the recent elections into a new perspective. Rwanda expert Philip Reintjens, quoted in Open Democracy, describes Kagame as probably the worst war criminal in office today. Even where the coverage is critical, generally speaking, it avoids saying anything like that in either content or tone. Rather, the stories the media tell broadly serve the interests of regime revisionism, dignifying it as an anti-genocide force and a whiz at economic growth. And that spurious misrepresentation begins in Washington and London.